Okay, sup, Eth. I have a lot to say on the topic. It's what I've effectively been dancing around in my head for the last 6 months, probably longer as well. So I'm just gonna, shoot the breeze, see what sticks. And yeah, I'll watch it through again and give you some like timestamps or something. And I don't really know where to begin, and I'm just going to. Um, So effectively, what I was telling you is that I've come up with a bunch of different metaphors for what the self is, and the reason I've come up with a bunch of metaphors is because I think the best way to define what one's self is by what one's self does. So it's a functionalist approach because I describe all the many different functions that it serves. So first, I'll kind of set the scene, and then I'll talk about a bunch of different functions as we go like that. So, to set the scene, there are three important concepts: the self, obviously, and that goes in the middle. And then to situate the self, I've got one thing on each side. Um, on one side, on the side that is further away from the self, kind of in the real world, so to speak, is the body. But more than that is this concept called the theater of the mind. And the theater of the mind is effectively where it all happens, like it's always there. For example, this cup right now is in both of our experiences, but I can move it over here and it leaves the theater of the mind. And then it comes back, and now, like, I am experiencing this cup again. Everything in the world, whether it's a person, an object, a color, an idea, a sound, all of these things come and go, right? But there is one thing that doesn't come and go, and that is the theater. It is like the frame where it all happens. And there's a bunch of interesting stuff to say about it, and like how concrete of a idea it is. But I think just from our subjective experience, like when you just think of what it's like being a human, um, it's really apt. I think it's really solid. So you've got this idea of the theater of the mind. So you imagine yourself like in a theater and you're looking at the screen. There's this big screen where it happens. So that's one side. And for argument's sake, let's call that the stage, because it's like a stage show, a theater production sort of thing. And on the other side of the self, I have the subject. The subject being you. Like for example, I right now am saying I, and when I say I am referring to the subject. Only I can say I and refer to me. In that thought, that's when we talk about me, myself, and I. When I say I, we are speaking in the first person. When I say me, I am talking about me from the second and third person. So, for example, if I say, me and this went to the shops, I'm saying it as if there is a bystander that is seeing me and this person go to the shops, or from like a godly third perspective. And then obviously the third one is me, myself, and I. And that is a way that we frame the kind of transition from the outside world, me, in the middle, myself, and then on the inside, I, me, myself, and I. And yeah, so the self is situated in between the first person and the second, third person. And what does it do? Now we're going to get into some of the metaphors. It does a lot of things. I think For one moment, when you think of the subject, you can think of them as the audience, like the audience of my experience. I am the observer. I'm just observing my life as it goes and doing my best to kind of channel my energy in all of these different ways, which is one of the functions of the self in the moment that I'll get to in a moment. Um, but yeah, so the subject on one side is the audience of the show that's happening on the stage on the other side. And if there's no audience, then by definition, it's not really a show that's taking place, you know? And on the flip side, if there's no show taking place, but there is still a subject, there is nothing to be subjected to. And so we can't say they're conscious either. Like, by definition, I think when we talk about consciousness, these are the two things that are required. You need an object of experience, for example, cup, this is an object, and you need a subject. And I am being subjected to the experience of object right now. And when I say object, I don't literally just mean objects. Again, I mean colors, ideas, sounds, people. The concept of justice could potentially be an object. And the way that I define objects isn't by the fact of tangible, three-dimensional solid object. The way I define objects is anything that is identifiable. Anything that you can point at and give it an identity, that is an object of experience. So, imagine you're seeing this for the first ever time and you don't know what to call it. So you see it, you kind of wrap your head around it, so to speak, and it leaves. And then some time goes past and then this comes back and you say, oh, this is identical to previous instance of this. And because you have identified that it's identical, you give it an identity, and that makes it that gives it a name. That means you can point at it and say cup or mug, whatever, And I don't know if you've ever tried meditating or anything like that, but it's impossible to identify I. I, the subject. You can rattle around in your mind forever, but trying to identify me, it's like the sun trying to shine a light on itself, or it's like trying to bite your own teeth. I've heard those. I think they're cool. It just can't happen. The observer can't be observed. I think there's a cool GIF I can show you of a similar sort of thing. But yeah, we are unidentifiable. So to figure out who we are, the only way we can figure out who we are is by figuring out who we're not. So for example, I am not cup. I can process of elimination say, okay, whatever I am not this thing that I can identify. And there is a religion, I want to say it's Islam, but it might be Hinduism. When they when they define God, they don't define him by saying God is infinite, God is omnipotent, like the Christians do, sort of thing. They do the opposite. They say God is not finite, God is not knowable, God is not limited, for example. And it's for this exact reason, like this. We don't know what it is. We only know what it isn't. Which I just think is so beautiful. And I think it applies to us as well. So then how do we come to know who we are? Because we still learn a lot about ourselves through life. And I kind of spoiled it in that last sentence there. We don't learn who we are. we learn who ourselves are. So, ourselves is primarily this character that we become. It is identifiable. Every part of us that we can identify isn't a reflection of us, it's a reflection of ourselves. And there's a few really fascinating, I feel like that's a great way to define the line between ourselves and us. But it also opens the door to so many amazing, like so liberating ideas. Like for starters, you yourself can be whatever you want yourself to be, because yourself is a product of all of your experiences, all these objects that are beyond you. And that means that it can be whatever you want it to be. You can let parts of yourself go that you don't want to attach yourself to anymore. um, and you can, yeah, become whoever you want to be. Like when you wake up in the morning and you kind of, like when I put on my Sam suit, so to speak, um, I'm not bound by it, though it often may feel like that because I've been conditioned to be me since the day I was born. um, there is a sort of a letting go, and the first step to really unlocking it is recognizing that divide. Anything that I'm able to identify, I can say, okay, cool, that's not me. Cool. So now that we've got that line a bit more clear, um, what is the self? I think, in a very basic way, it is a lens. Like, you know how people say, like, oh, he's seeing through rose tinted glasses, or like his perspective is a bit distorted, sort of thing. Primarily, it's from the inside out, from the subject to the stage. It is a lens that we observe the world through. Um, and but it's a two-way flow of communication. So when I was sitting with you at the thing, at the concert, I said that the self functions like a filter, because it it takes data on the outside and puts it in formation and creates information in the process. So out there is all of this stuff which inherently has no meaning. Like, we are the ones that assign meaning to different qualia experiences. Things happen, like I knock this cup and it makes a sound. And we are the ones that recognize the patterns between two different things and are able to connect the dots. And that's one of the things that the self does. It connects all of these dots together, creating information, and it becomes this sort of web that we look through. Um, and what does a filter do? There are two things. On one hand, a filter gets rid of all of the impurities in a stream. And that's true for air streams, water streams, signal feeds, um, but it's also true for streams of consciousnesses, streams of consciousness. Um, and it takes out all of the impurities. So if something is getting through that you don't want to get through, yourself has a way to stop that before it comes through, and that's fantastic. um but for starters, if something keeps getting through that you don't want it to get through, that can be really frustrating, and you can make your filter stronger. um but what's interesting is that that's not all a filter's supposed to do, because if a filter is just stronger and stronger and stronger, then it's actually going to um, not let through the good stuff as well. And that's what that's what a filter is actually trying to do, is enable the stream to flow as smoothly as possible. So you want a filter to take out as many of the impurities as possible, but not at the expense of the things you do want to get through. And that's where I think a lot of people go wrong when it comes to mental health is we've created selves that are too cut off and it becomes very isolating. So that's the filter analogy. But beyond that, I think there's more to the self. Like right now, I've kind of portrayed the self to be um, a two-dimensional lens. Like it's almost just like a slice that goes through the subject and the experience. Um, but I think it also is 3D as well. It's more than just 2D. And that opens a world of possibilities because that means that I am able to, well, for starters, the self is malleable and it's able to negotiate different situations. Um, but yeah, this is where I'm going to pivot into a new sort of bubble of thought. So this transition might not be perfect, but I've got a really cool idea to do with impressions and expressions and depression and all of this sort of stuff, where I think the body, including the self, but also the physical body as well, functions as a pressure chamber, and your self has a sort of a pressure gauge built into it somewhere, where you want to be able to take this energy within you and you want to be able to channel it through yourself. And in doing so, you want this pressure, this energy to make an impression on the world. So, um, oh, it's a shame I don't have it here. In fact, let me be right back. I know where it is. Just one moment. I got one of these for my birthday. I may have told you this already, I don't know. But this thing here, I had these as a kid and I loved them at the time. But it's a really beautiful analogy for what I'm talking about now. Yourself kind of functions like this. You're a blank canvas. But then you've got this energy inside you, your potential, potent. When people talk about like a smell being potent, it carries a power. Potent means power. So when people say, wow, you have so much potential, they're complementing your power and specifically your willpower, because they see that you are a force to be reckoned with. So if somebody says, wow, you have a lot of potential when you're like 6 or whatever, that's kind of what they're saying. They're saying, wow, this kid's a force to be reckoned with, which again, I think is beautiful. So you've got this energy and you want to channel it through yourself and go from the inside to the outside objective world. And when you do that, you make an impression like this. And that's what your self does. It allows pressure to make an impression. So, for example, or actually to elaborate, this is my impression here, which I have made from the subjective side of the self. Like me, the subject, the audience. I see the world like this. This is my impression. It's impressive. But what's interesting is that you, as another person, you don't see my impression, you see my expression. And one thing for mental health that I think would do, it would go a long way to clarify the discussion, is people need their impression to match their expression. There needs to be like a harmony between these two. And you'll know that you're mentally healthy and yourself is in a good spot. Like, this is a good way to test it. If you're on the inside and the way you're manifesting yourself is aligned with what your intentions were, if your intentions and actions are in the same thing, good stuff, right? And then yeah, I guess I'll do this now. It you'll I think meditation is when you allow yourself to stop making an impression. I think in our, especially our Western societies, we are always encouraged to make an impression from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, and we become consumed in in this immersive experience of our world, such that we never allow ourselves to decompress. Because to make an impression, you need to compress yourself, or you compress your energy within yourself to make this impression, right? And then meditation is a state of decompression like that. And it's just a matter of just observing your reality as you see it without trying to tango with it. You're not trying to impress yourself in any which way. You're just trying to see it as it is and kind of be as blunt as you can be, or as like see it as it is, be frank, sort of thing. Um, yeah. But what's interesting is not only is this decompression, this is also depression as well. And it's a really, really subtle difference. But depression is when you're unable to re immerse yourself. So, like, that's why I actually think I learned a lot from my depressive year or so that I had, was because I kind of saw the world in a very two-dimensional way. As in, I was almost watching the movie of my life. My body was doing one thing, and my mind was literally trapped behind it. And I think this is exactly why, you know? And in this depressive state, emotions lost their depth and contrast, and same with colors and textures and just all of life. It genuinely it became two-dimensional. And I think this is it, because anytime I tried to make an impression, life would just squash it right back out of me. And I didn't have the internal, call it willpower, call it energy, call it capability, to make an impression and make it stick. Because this takes a lot of effort, or this did take a lot of effort for me to hold up and be a person in this world, be a character, which is what your self is. It's your character. To be a character took a lot of effort, and I'd come home at the end of the night and go, Jesus Christ. And then you'd wake up and do it all over again. And if you're so desperately pushing against yourself and the pressure from the objective world is too much, it just crushes you time and time again, and that can get demoralizing. It it really can, you know. So that's what depression is. But I think there's benefits to it as well. I think it's a safety mechanism, because you're trying to conserve your energy in a way, um, and reassess. You're trying to find a new angle. And if, just as a side note, if you do know anybody suffering with depression and you do want to offer them any advice, or not advice, but encouragement, any time that that person makes an impression on the world, however small, whether that's getting out of bed and cleaning their teeth, or doing a single push up, or, like giving you a smile, that is how small of an impression is. Like, that's the first step to a developing an impression that has a bit of resilience. But you also want an impression that's malleable and kind of flexible. So what's interesting is now moving further away from depression to just what is a healthy self in general. It's about being well-rounded, because you don't want yourself to be one dimensional, because then what if the objective world throws a pressure at you that you weren't expecting? It You often meet people that are very set in the way that they hope their life will go, and then if it doesn't go that way, they get really thrown off. And it's because whatever pressure you're throwing their way, it's exposing a fragility in their self. It's like they're well rounded on this edge, but not this one, which means if you put pressure on this part, the whole thing could collapse like a house of cards, and people don't like that. So when people say they want to be a well-rounded individual, when you compliment someone on being a well-rounded individual, that's it. It's effectively saying the world could throw anything at that guy and he'd still be himself. He'd still be able to keep his impression solid. And I think that, again, is another great sign of a healthy self. Um, So we've talked about a lot of impressions, like making an impression on the world and you, being immersive. But I've got another thought which I think is um and that whole making an impression, it's very extroverted, right? It you know, being at a party and making an impression and other people noticing that and being like, wow, that guy's a character. Those are all very extroverted things to say. And that's because we've got a self and we're pressing in that way. Makes sense. But what's interesting is I think the self is malleable the other way too. So, for example, you're sitting there watching this video right now and you're listening to me and you aren't making an impression yourself. What you're actually doing, you're being receptive to my impression, which means that you aren't being um, like a puzzle piece. You're not the masculine piece that's pressing inwards. You are the feminine piece that is catching, like, are you picking up what I'm putting down, sort of thing? You're receiving. And that's another really important part of a healthy self is being able to go backwards in your mind and see the world as it is. So, in doing so, when I said earlier, um, like, I think I was holding this cup and I said, like, you're trying to wrap your head around this idea. I literally do think I mean that. I think you are trying to take your subjective mind and let this cup, I know this isn't a perfect explanation, but you're trying to take this cup and let the cup make its impression on the world. Let it be the masculine force. And in doing so, the focal point of the whole universe becomes here, and you distort yourself around it. And this happens with, you can do this with, I'm pretty sure, literally anything. And it it means that yourself is able to, is not, yourself isn't connected to you, the subject. Yourself is a product of the experiences, the identifiable stuff on the other side. So people start with this idea that I am this small thing and I have this little shield of self around me in this big wide world. But what's fascinating is that it's able to be inverted the other way. And when you do that, instead of having this small creature in this big wide world, it becomes this this big wide world becomes like you can see it as the globe, and you are this infinite consciousness that wraps around it and sees it out as it's meant to be. So if we were to, like, imagine just a giant vacuum of space, it goes on forever, and now let's take this two-dimensional slice that we'll call the self and just put it anywhere, just right in the middle. It, as soon as you flex it this way towards the subject, and like, this is me making an impression, being extroverted, being the masculine energy, it immediately makes the focal point of the whole universe somewhere within me. The focal center of this curvature of self all points towards somewhere on the inside of my subjective experience. And in doing so, the whole universe becomes infinite and I become like, I'm in it, I'm immersed. But alternatively, as soon as it flexes the other way, my subjective experience, the subject, the focal point is now on the other side, like this cup, for example, and I am receiving, which I just think is fantastic. So when somebody says, um, oh man, that person is self obsessed, I don't think that's a bad thing. I reckon everybody should be self obsessed because the self is the ultimate Swiss Army knife multi tool. It is your everything. It's how you, so it's how you find yourself, find yourself in the world. It's how you situate yourself in relation to other things. It's how you connect dots. It's how you see. It's how you communicate. Um, it's how you, I think, physically move and negotiate yourself in the world as well. So self-obsessed, good. The flip side is not good, and that is being self-centered. If you are self-centered, that means you don't allow the focal point of your universe to go anywhere but yourself. Like, for example, this cup. If I'm self-centered, it means the focal point is always within me, and you're never allowing yourself to become a true introvert. It like you, yeah, I think to be introverted, you need to be that con concave shape. So, and in doing so, puts the focal point outside you. I might be laboring on that point a little bit, but I hope that makes sense. Feel free to call and chat if you need more on that. Um, what else is the self? Um, I've got another idea which I haven't completely connected all the dots in my head with. But we'll give it a go, and it's the idea of the self as a lever. And what I mean by that is that it's the way that we physically shift our mindset as we go through life. So, for example, we have these two things, the stage and the subject, and they're one and the same because you can't have one without the other. And the self, almost like water cutting through a mountain, finds its way in the middle. And then once you've got this two-dimensional shape, what I think a person or what a mind is able to do is abstractly fix either the stage or the subject in place, like anchor it, and then use that anchor as a fulcrum and lever on the self, and in doing so, the other one shifts. So I'll give two examples, one of each. Imagine you are hiking and you find yourself on a beautiful mountaintop. It's a gorgeous setting. So the objective experience of your life, like what is the all the objects, the colors, the ideas, all of that you wouldn't change for the world. That's great. So we're going to anchor that in place. But the subject, like the subjective experience of how you're, I guess, feeling about it, not good. You want that to change. So what I think you can do is say, all right, I'm physically where I want to be, and then you can anchor that in whatever abstract way you can, and then yourself is able to morph around it. And in doing so, because your mind is able to go concave and you're able to wrap your head around stuff, it means you're able to find a new perspective wherever you want that perspective to be. Like there is like a grass is always greener, there is a bright side of life. And yeah, obviously this is getting very abstract, but I think it is there to be found. You just need to be looking at it on the right trajectory or something. And yeah, it's to do with this leverage, and I think it's to do with different resistances of different willpowers. Like, um, actually, I'll come back to that. The second example is the other way. Like me right now, in my mind, explaining this to you, I feel really good mentally. I feel like the way that my subject is engaging with myself right now, and myself is, remember, like this, it's where all my wisdom is, like my giant corkboard. I've got all these different dots connected to. That dynamic is really good. But I look around my physical room and I could probably wash my sheets and I could get rid of some of that rubbish and stuff. So my objective world could improve. And I think in a similar way, I need to anchor my subjective experience in here. I need to anchor it and say, this is solid, this is where I want to be. And then I need to leverage on myself to command my body to do stuff and be the person I want to be. I need to like embody myself. And in a similar thing, it's to do with free will and it's to do with leveraging, like letting go of more resistance on this side and maybe tightening up on the resistance on this side. And then my body goes. that way. So, as an example, right now, I want you to try something with me, and I want you to like look straight ahead, and I want you to eventually at some point look to the right. But there are two ways that you can look to the right, and then there is a third hybrid, which I think is the best way to be. So, we're going to look to the right, but I want you to only press, I want you to use more energy on the subjective side, on the left side of your eye. So if you imagine there's a bigger force on the left side of your eye, and it will like pivot forwards, like a door is opening. So it's like that. And the second one is instead of weakening the resistance on this side, I kind of want you to tighten the resistance on this side. Or actually, you might be loosening the resistance on this side and letting it come backwards. So instead of pivoting forward, you actually pivot backwards. And that's, yeah, I think that's an example of kind of the leverage idea, that there are these different fulcrums that we can choose in our mind and pivot on this axis. And ideally, I think the healthy way to be is to use both of them at the same time. And in doing so, you don't need to have all of these different abstract fulcrums. It's like there's just one fulcrum, and it's where I want to be at all times. So now when you look to the right, it's kind of like a nice, gentle, you know, it's right in the middle, balanced, centered, all that good stuff. So that's kind of the idea of the self being a lever, and I think that just to finish off that point, I think we kind of just shimmy our way through life, like, oh, okay, I'm in my room, I need to do this sort of stuff, and then like, so I anchor the subject and I shift to the object, and then it's like, oh, now I'm in this new objective place. I want my subjective mind to be somewhere else, and then we shimmy the subject, and we shimmy, 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 and we just move through life, and it's kind of this yeah. I let me know if that makes sense. I've kind of run out of things to say on that front for now, but I think it's really, really cool. Oh, in fact, if you go and look up like the different types of leverage, and I mean this in like a literal physics sense, like you would have learned this in year 11, um, there are three different types of lever. And but what I want you to do, and what I've done, in fact, I'll send this to you in an image so you can see it, is that we can have two shapes, both of which can be the fulcrum. So we'll have like a blue square here and a red square here, and then we'll put a lever through the middle. So this is like the subject, the stage, and the self. And there are only a few ways that this becomes a lever. One is by having an arrow at the bottom and pushing here, anchoring this, which will lift, it will manipulate this way. Another one is the opposite, where we have a pressure up here, which fulcrums here, and it moves this one like that. And the third is you can push in between, at which point it will like, I'll send you the photo actually. I'm losing you there, but there are there are four different places we can push. And I think by pushing in the middle, it I think that is literally how our self gets created. It is forever squeezing in between the subject and the stage, and it's forever doing that and always trying to get closer. And honestly, I'm getting to a point where I think that that's how cell division works, because it's forever trying to get in between different entities, and it's all like, I think that is like a fractal pattern. Yourself is never going to meet right at the middle. And in fact, this brings me to my next point, where what is a primary principle of a healthy self, and that is vulnerability. And what I mean by that is that we've got this communication channel between, my subjective experience and the objective world. And we need to allow the truth to kind of get through it. So if you put up this self, which disconnects the two, and it becomes this sort of authoritarian like line that everything has to cross. Um, you aren't allowing the wiggle room for yourself to grow because it's already met, and yourself evolves by further expanding in the middle and creating further nuance right in the middle of your point of view. So, and that's this leverage thing, which I'll send you in a photo. The only way for that to happen is if there is um, more room to grow in the middle. And the way you do that is by not allowing the self to completely meet in the middle. Like it needs almost that benefit of the doubt, or like the willingness to be proven wrong. Like potentially it's even a curiosity sort of thing. Um, oh, it'll make so much more sense with this image that I send you. Um, yeah, so now I've got another tangent to go on, and it's to do with the potential argument that I shared a little bit earlier. And it's like, if you were to like I talked about the body being a pressure chamber, and we can talk about this potential. Um, what is potential, and when people compliment you on it, why does it feel so good? It's because they're complimenting your willpower. They're saying, "Wow, this kid is a force to be reckoned with. He is impactful. He is impressive." That's quite literally what they're saying is, you have a lot of potential, you are impressive, or you have the potential to be great. They're complimenting your power. But what does it mean to people buy it? Like, I buy into that myself. I look at myself and I think, yes, I do have potential, and I have potential to do so many things. Like, for example, potential to write a book, or for you, potential to create a movie. And what I think happens is that when that happens, I look inward and I kind of resist the flow. Because if you imagine this energy is flowing through you and it wants to go through you, for me to feel my potential, I need to resist it. And I'll give you an example and then we'll come back. Imagine there's a beautiful girl at the bar, and you you are attracted to her for so many different reasons. And there is almost like a magnetism to it. There isn't that attraction. If you weren't